Hello everyone. In this video, I want to talk about some of the advanced configuration tools that we can use in Windows 10. Last video, we talked about settings, which were basically the tier 1, the beginning level of configuration. So we're going to dig a little bit deeper this time. So if we go down to settings, if we go down to the Windows Start menu and start typing control, we would get to the control panel. And this is the next layer of settings. Notice this looks similar to settings. It has nine different categories of control panels, and these control panels are going to give us more access to more specific or more advanced features of the different settings that you see here. The one I'm going to deal with specifically right now is system and security. Now I'm going to mention right now many of these can be gotten accessed in many different places. I am just going to show you one of those places where I tend to find most of my settings that I want to work with, and that is in system and security. Again, you can see a bunch of different settings. Down here at Administrative Tools. Administrative Tools is a collection of system tools, and they're all in one place. These can all be gotten to from other places. In fact, Task Scheduler and services and that kind of stuff can all be gotten to from my favorite tool, the Computer Management tool. Computer Management is an MMC, a Microsoft Management Console. MMCs are customizable templates where you can add certain modules that you're going to use frequently. So this is a pre-built one by Windows, and it has system tools that we use all the time. This is actually, when I tend to use these tools, this is the first place I go because, well, it's very convenient and all of the stuff that I need is stored right here. So Task Scheduler, Event Viewer, shared folders, user groups, that kind of thing. There's also a separate section for services and applications. So I'll go over a couple of these very briefly. They are detailed a little bit more in your book, so I'm not going to spend too much time on them. But one of the things I want to talk about specifically was the Event Viewer. Now, the Event Viewer is basically, if you ever hear someone talk about, have you looked at the logs, the Windows logs, when something is going wrong? Here, this is the Windows logs, is the Event Viewer. What the Event Viewer does is whenever something happens on the computer that has been flagged to be recorded, to be logged, it gets logged right here. There are event IDs for all the different pre-built events that could happen in Windows, and then more information. So if I click on this particular one, this particular information event was to say that we successfully scheduled the software protection service for restart at this day. Okay, fine. But things like that, there's a ton of information. Most of it is not an error. Most of it is not a problem. You see this little error here I'll talk about in a second. Most of the things that you see in these logs are just information, things that Windows keeps track of as things happen. This allows us to be able to go back in time, look at the logs, look at the events that occurred, and try and piece together events that occur. If we are having problems, or if we had an unexpected shutdown or something of our computer, we can look at these logs once we get comfortable reading them, and we can try and figure out what happened, what went wrong. And because sometimes it's not necessarily obvious how these things work. Now, to get back to the little error here, this error I happen to know. 8198 is the didn't activate Windows error, license activation. I was working with doing an answer file, and then I accidentally ran sysprep on my machine, which wiped everything personalized on my machine, like we talked about in chapter 2. One of the things that was personalized on my machine was the activation license number. So I would have to go and enter it back in. I've just been too lazy to do it. But then every time my machine starts up, it looks for activation, doesn't see it, and posts an error. And so now I have an error in my log. So, and that's true for all of the different parts of Windows. This is just the application events. There's also security events, such as audits. Audits are logins. It's not just people that log in. It is people that log in, but they're also programs that need special access to certain parts of the system, and they have to log in as well. And so most of this that you see, audit success, this is the system successfully logging into itself. You'll also see some user account logins too. That means I successfully logged in. And the list goes on. There are thousands upon thousands of these different event IDs. Microsoft has them all available online, so you can go through them and see exactly what a specific event is. They also tend to have generic and more detailed information about what this particular event is if you were researching and looking through the events. So a very useful thing, Windows Logs, the event viewer. You're able to actually create a custom view where you can specify which events you want to look for or which areas you want to look for if you're trying to research a certain problem. But we'll do that a little bit more when we talk about security. Now, the local users and groups, when we start working with users, there's going to be a number of ways that we can access users. You can get at them from settings, you can get that from control panels, and you can get at them from here in computer management, and probably a few more places as well. I tend to like computer management for my users. And the reason I like this is because I can get detailed information, or I can just do basic information all in the same place. So all of the stuff that I need to do, I can get at here. Notice you should have the same user that I do. Everyone should have a user X. You should also have these 3 default users that Windows builds in. Notice they all have little down arrows, meaning that these are disabled accounts, meaning people may not log in as these accounts until we enable them. We'll talk about that when we do the chapter on users. But just going to note ahead of time that this is my preferred place, and I'll be coming back to this place to work with users. Performance tab does what it sounds like. It monitors the performance of the computer. It lets you do a number of things. You can either do real time, like right here, the system summary, you can see what your computer is doing, what percent of idle time your hard drive has. In other words, is your hard drive being accessed a lot, being read a lot? Processor time, how much is your processor being used? This is a percentage of how much your processor is being used at any given time. So it's pretty low, as you can tell, because all I'm doing is sitting here and talking to you guys. So here's where we're able to monitor a lot of information. We can collect baseline information, which would be the beginning. When you first have a brand new computer, you can run it and collect. This is information about how the computer runs. This is how the computer runs when it's brand new. And take that information, take that data, and maybe 6 months later, when the user is complaining how slow their brand new i7 machine is, you can then go run some performance monitoring on it. Compare it to that baseline, compare it to that first set when the computer was brand new, and see, is it really any different than when it was brand new, or did you just get so used to your fast computer that you're complaining because it's not instantaneous? That's a very common thing, by the way. So having this information is very useful. It's also useful to target problems. Like if the machine really is running slow, you can see which features were running slowly. And again, we'll talk about that when we get into performance monitoring. The device manager is one I wanted to mention briefly. This is where we access hardware configuration information. Every piece of hardware in our machine is going to have every piece of hardware that is connected to our machine is going to have what we call a device driver. Device drivers are pieces of software made by the manufacturer of that piece of hardware, so that the information, the data that comes from those devices gets translated by the driver into something that Windows 10 can understand, because Windows 10 doesn't know which printer you're going to have. It can't just make itself available to be used by Ricoh and Epson and Samsung and all these different printers. That'd be so much data and so much coding that Microsoft would have to do. They don't do it. They just say, this is how it's supposed to work for us. And then all the manufacturers write drivers that will translate all the data that comes from their machine into Windows 10 speak, I guess would be the best way to put it, so that the Windows will be able to run any piece of hardware as long as they have written a driver for it. So very quickly, if I go to my network adapters, this Intel gigabit network connection, this is my network card for my computer, my actual physical computer. So if I double click on it, I can come in here and get information in the properties. Notice driver tab here. First of all, the device is working properly. Yes, I'm very happy about that. If I go to the driver, this will give me the information about who the driver was made by, what it is, what version it is, and I can actually disable the entire device. I can update the driver. I can completely uninstall the driver if I want. So the device manager allows us to get in and deal with and configure hardware. So whenever you're adding pieces to the machine, adding pieces to your computer, you'll most likely have to come in here and make sure that you have the appropriate software installed to be able to use the hardware that you've put in. Okay, so the device manager, again, we will deal with when a little bit later when we start going into, when I say a little bit later, I mean in other classes, when we start going into actual hardware. A+ is a course where we start dealing with the actual hardware, taking computers apart, installing different cards and computers and stuff like that. Okay. All right. So that's it for system tools. Disk management, I will hold off on until we actually work with disks in a few chapters. Services I want to talk about though for a second. Services are small programs that run in conjunction with Windows 10. Windows 10 itself is actually a really small piece of software. It's not that big. What makes it big are all of the add-on things that are used. So, and that's what these services are. Most of the time, we don't use these services, but then when we need them, we have to have them here so they can boot up and run and then take care of whatever it is we want. So, as an example, let me see if I can come up with a good, here we go, the print spooler. So by default, Windows itself doesn't handle printing. The print spooler does handle printing. The print spooler is a little program, a little service that runs with Microsoft, with Windows 10, that handles taking printer data and spooling it either from the program like Word that has the data to the printer, or spooling it to different, or handling different interactions, I should say, would be the best way to put it. They even said it right here in description. So if the service is running, that means you are able to print. I can stop this service if I want, and if I do, if I stop this service, it'll attempt to stop it. Hey, look at that. Now I can't print, essentially, until I start the service again. So the service is not necessary for Windows to run. It can keep doing everything at once except print right now. So when I start the service back up, now the print spooler is moving. Now I'm able to print again. Okay. So services, and there are a bunch of them, are very useful and very important. And more importantly, they also are kind of intertwined. There are a number of services. Let me see if I can go get you one that I can show, like RAS remote access, allowing you to connect to a remote network. So in other words, to be able to dial into a network at work, or in the I say dial in, I'm just dated myself, to be able to connect to a remote computer. Which we do all the time. We log in, Skype in, SSH in, FTP in, Telnet in, many different network protocols that allow us to connect to other computers. This doesn't work alone though. This has dependencies. Dependencies are services that this service is required to have running for it to run. So in other words, the remote access auto connection driver has to be up and running before the manager is able to run. In other words, it expects this to run. If this doesn't run, this is looking for this and it's not there, and then it can't run, it'll shut down. So dependencies are other services that these services rely on. So they're all intertwined in different ways. Not all of them, but many of them are. Okay. So that's it for services for right now. So this is computer management. Lots of different tools, lots of very good tools that we can use to configure and administer our computer. Okay. All right. That is it for now. I hope you all got something out of this, and hope you have a good week. I will hopefully talk to you soon.